From the rolling hills of Scotland to the bustling streets of London, the UK is home to loads of different accents. But have you ever wondered which accent sounds the most trustworthy? Well, in this episode, we're going to take a look at a recent survey that asked Brits to rank the UK accents in terms of how trustworthy they are. And you might be surprised to find out the accents that made the top 3. Let's talk about it. Alright mate, and welcome to another episode of the Dan Sensei British English Podcast, the podcast designed for intermediate and advanced level English learners that want to know more about British life, British culture, and of course, British English. Now in today's episode, we're talking all about British accents. You know, there's loads of them, but we're looking at which ones sound the most trustworthy. Which ones, when you hear them, you think, yes, I can trust that person. They sound trustworthy. Because some accents do, and some accents don't. And I should say, everything in this podcast is subjective. It's just people's opinion. There's no right or wrong. I'm not saying this is 100% correct, but I thought it was interesting to see what British people think about different British accents. Now, this episode is based on a recent survey that were carried out in the UK where they asked around 4,000 British people to rank accents based on how trustworthy they personally think they sound. It was carried out by a website. It's onby.com or something like that. Not really important, but the results are actually really interesting. Without further ado, let's take a quick look at the top 3. In third place, we've got the West Country accent. In second place, fills my heart to the brim with pride, it's Yorkshire, my own accent, love to see it. And number 1, Scottish. The Scottish accent, which is a bit strange because Scotland's got loads of accents, but for some reason in this survey, Scottish is just one accent. Either way, Scottish came first place, top of the leaderboard. The Scottish accent is the most trustworthy accent in the UK. But let's take a bit of a deeper dive to take a look at some of the reasons why these accents were voted the most trustworthy. Now, when it comes to the first place accent, the Scottish accent, there were 3 key things that came up over and over again that made people feel that this accent is very trustworthy, right? The first thing that came up over and over again was its association with intelligence. People feel that the Scottish accent makes people sound more intelligent. So if you're trying to sound more intelligent, maybe try putting on a Scottish accent. Maybe it'll work. I don't know. The other thing that keeps coming up with the Scottish accent is it sounds very honest. It sounds like that the person you're speaking to is telling you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, of course, they can lie, but it doesn't sound like they're lying. That's the key. So if you feel like, I don't know, lying to someone, try lying in a Scottish accent. That's the last Scottish accent I'm doing that were terrible. That's worse than Shrek. And the third one that comes up is sincerity. It sounds sincere when you're talking to people from Scotland. Their accent makes you feel like they're being very sincere to you and very nice. And those 3 different things combined together to make the Scottish accent number 1 in terms of trustworthy accents in the UK. Now, that's all well and good, but the real star of the show here is the Yorkshire accent, my natural accent, the one that is given to the people who happen to grow up where I grew up. So the Yorkshire accent came in second place in the list of trustworthy accents, which was surprising to me because growing up with this accent, and we're going to touch on this a bit later, it's seen as a bit of a drawback sometimes, to be honest, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. But I'm happy to see Yorkshire in second place on this list, and the reasons were that people feel that the Yorkshire accent is friendly. It feels like you have a very friendly relationship with that person when they open their gob and out comes that Yorkshire accent. I nearly said beautiful accent, but it's not. It's not that beautiful, to be honest. But people feel it's very friendly. They feel that people who use this accent are very approachable. You could go and talk to that person. They seem friendly. They seem nice to talk to. And these things combined made it the second most trustworthy accent in the UK. But I can't help but notice that people didn't associate it with intelligence, which is both offensive and actually pretty accurate, I guess. And in third place, we have the West Country accent, which is an accent that is found quite commonly in the southwest of England. And I'm not going to try and do an impression because I can't, but a lot of people say it sounds like a farmer or a pirate or somewhere in between. Arr, I go get my combine harvester. That were awful. When am I going to learn not to do accents? Anyway, so that accent, not the one I did, the actual West Country accent, came in third place in terms of trustworthy accents. But why? Why? So it's got a very strong association with the countryside. It's not considered like a city accent. It's considered a very countryside accent, and therefore it's associated with all the good stuff related to the countryside. You know, relaxed way of life and taking life easy and not being too serious and all this kind of stuff. All these things combined made this accent seem very trustworthy, which I think is also pretty interesting. Now, I know how the world works, right? It's great to look at the top 3 and be like, isn't that nice that Scotland is top of the list? That's great. But I know what you really want to know. And I know that because I also wanted to know this. And that is, what is the worst accent? There's something about people that want to know what the worst thing is so you can feel better about yourself. So I instantly went from the top 3 right to the bottom. I want to see the last one, and that is the Brummie accent. Unlucky people from Birmingham, you've got the least trustworthy accent in the UK. I don't believe a word that you're saying to me. I wouldn't trust you as far as I can throw you, and I can't throw you very far. But all joking aside, Birmingham came bottom of the list for whatever reason. Which is sad if you're from Birmingham, you know, that sucks to be you. But I always kind of assumed that Yorkshire should be near the bottom of the list. So I'm kind of glad it's Birmingham and not Yorkshire, to be honest. But that's quite selfish. Anyway, in terms of the Birmingham accent and what made people feel like it's not a very trustworthy accent, is the fact that Birmingham's accent apparently sounds very negative. That means every time somebody from Birmingham opens their mouth, the other person feels more depressed than when their mouth were closed. And that is kind of funny. And that negativity is kind of linked with untrustworthiness. Untrustworthiness, that's a long word. Untrustworthiness. Interesting. And yeah, so people thought that the Birmingham accent was the least trustworthy accent in the UK. Sucks to be you, Birmingham. Now, there's a very big disclaimer that comes with all of this stuff when it comes to accents, because everything is subjective. My opinion is not the same as your opinion, is not the same as Mr. Smith's opinion. And nobody's opinion is more right than somebody else's, you know? So it is all very subjective. Maybe you think that the Scottish accent is terrible and you think that the Birmingham accent is the most trustworthy thing you've ever heard. That's great. That's the whole point of this. There's no right or wrong, just your own opinions. But there is something to be said for like the general perception among people, like the general feeling towards different accents, because there's a lot of different factors that come into play. Now, some people may associate certain things with accents, such as like intelligence or professionalism, or in this case, honesty, right? While that is not really true, because it comes down to each person. Not everybody from Scotland is trustworthy because they have a Scottish accent, right? It's case by case, but generally people often, and this is a good idiom, get tarred with the same brush. Everybody in that group gets the same treatment because they're part of that group, even though it doesn't work that way. Now, in life, this can be good. For some people, it could also be very negative in terms of things like regional background. Earlier, I mentioned that I wasn't surprised that Yorkshire's accent isn't linked with intelligence, because people from Yorkshire are often seen as very unintelligent based on their accent, and probably loads of other stuff. But that is kind of a stereotype, that they're nice people, but we're a bit simple in the head. And, you know, that could be true in some cases, but it's not true across the board. You know, that's not how it works. So regional background and social class is a big part of this. Maybe you guys are aware of an accent which is RP, or received pronunciation, right? It's kind of BBC British English pronunciation. And people associate this with the upper classes. And if you've got a really regional dialect, you can be seen as lower class just because of that, which is a bit crap, really, isn't it? So that context of like social groupings and regional backgrounds and class can also affect how we see different accents. So it's something to think about. And in some cases, stereotyping is very strong when it comes to accents in the UK. And it can even have implications on like getting a certain job, because you sound a certain way. So people associate that with certain character traits, and that can stop you actually getting a job just based on how it sounds when you open your mouth, which is a bit wild, but that happens in the UK and probably all over the world all the time. So it's just something I wanted to mention, is an accent is just an accent. It doesn't really tell you very much about the person at all. Get to know the person, and the accent is just part of the picture. You know what I'm saying? So don't go writing people off, or don't listen to everything a Scottish person tells you just because they've got a Scottish accent. Don't work this way. And, you know, judge everything case by case. Don't judge a book by its cover. So, yeah, that's basically everything in terms of the disclaimer, you know, the disclaimer. But I thought this was pretty interesting, that we've got, you know, the top three. We've got the Scottish accent, the Yorkshire accent, the West Country accent. Very cool. And I thought it was kind of entertaining that Birmingham came last in a taking the piss kind of way. Not serious. None of this is serious. So, you know. And as I said, it is all very, very subjective. So don't worry about it. What you should do is pay attention to the individual, not the accent. And that way, we all win. And speaking of winning, if you haven't already, you should download my A to Z guide of British slang ebook, totally free. Link's down there. Click it now. I'll send it you straight away. But that's it for this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.